So with that, we'll move on to 7.2, consideration of transient occupancy tax, voluntary collection agreements. And this, we'll give it to Susan Parker, CAO. And I think you can see Pat on, so I'm pretty sure he has some involvement in this as well.
All right, so good afternoon, Board. Patrick Sullivan, County Tax Administrator. This item is a follow-up to the previous discussion we had on April 12th regarding voluntary collection agreements for transient occupancy tax and the possibility of doing another investigation, a sweep of all the unregistered rentals and trying to account for all of those. The last direction we had from your board was to pursue both, if possible, on a parallel track. But as staff has gotten into this more, our initial findings is that it will not be possible to pursue them both simultaneously. The nature of the agreements with Airbnb and Vrbo would basically preclude us completing an enforcement effort. If we were to go through the time to do an RFP to get a software provider like Host Compliance that we had before, there are other competitors out there. So whichever one we ended up going with, once we began those efforts, it could take 12 to 18 months if we were to have the staff capacity. During that time, we wouldn't be able to sign an agreement because the nature of those agreements generally has included a waiver of enforcement efforts against existing debt. So we wouldn't be able to go after those back taxes for the people we found. So just as we got deeper into it, it doesn't appear that there's a feasible way to do both at the same time. Essentially, we're asking your board to provide direction about which one you want to go with. If it's still our understanding your board ultimately wishes to have voluntary collection agreements, staff would recommend that we just proceed directly with those. There wouldn't be any great benefit or gain to going through that enforcement effort. In the meantime, if we are ultimately going to use these collection agreements, and there's the functional limitations of staff capacity, both in the administrative office and the treasurer tax collector's office. So if your board has any further questions, I'm happy to address them, but that's the overview of where we're at now.
Thank you, Pat. Supervisor Pyska?
Yeah, I really appreciate you looking into this. And, you know, it has been a struggle. You know, do we let go of all the people that are in non-compliance and give up their back taxes? But given the capacity issues that we've got with staff right now, it's probably best to just move forward with this. We will catch everybody that's on these platforms once we're engaged. It's just we won't be able to go after them for back taxes. So, you know, at some point we just need to make a decision and move forward. And I think that's the right thing to do. And if we do move quickly enough, because a lot of groundwork has been done, we could have this up and running during this summer season, potentially.
Supervisor Sabatier?
I think this sounds like a much easier way to go into the future rather than not going through the voluntary collection agreements. Most people, if they want to keep their homes filled up, are going to want to be part of a major online website. That just makes it easier because there's a lot of traffic going through there. So I think we move forward with that, and hopefully within the next year or so, maybe you can come back, and if we think there's still residual at that point, maybe we can do another side investigation to get as many people on board that are outside of the VRBO sites that are online that are still kind of skirting from paying those taxes, because I definitely want to aim for fair business practice where everybody is doing the same thing, not just some. But I think that the first sweep we did got a whole bunch, and I think this will get even more. And so I think this is the direction to go.
All right, any other comment from the board? Hearing none, I'll open it up to the public for any comments or concerns. All right, I'm not seeing anyone on Zoom, so bring it back to the board for direction, I think it is, right?
I agree with what both of our previous supervisors said. Yeah, I think moving forward is the best way to go, so I agree with the recommendation.
I do too. I agree.
And I do too, even though it's a done deal. All right.
You can always sway us.
Yeah. Just say no, just to say no. Yeah. All right. No, I'm in agreement. Thank you, Pat.
Welcome, thank you.
Tax collector elect.
All right. Let's see. Now we have our 7.3.
7.4.
Or 7.
Sorry, no, you're
Yeah,
right, 3.
okay.
And he's still on, so.
Okay, good. Consideration of cannabis equity grant applications processing, and with that, I'm pretty sure that CAO is going to give the floor back to Pat.
Well, thank you again, Board. This is a update on new information regarding the cannabis equity grants, considering that we've closed our first round of applications here for local cultivators and businesses. Just to highlight some of the results of the application period, we received 49 applications that at least appear initially to be viable and would meet the program criteria. What we need to look at now is how to proceed with those applications. We previously provided an overview to your board about the different program models that are available to us, and our plan remains to focus on fees, local fees and taxes, essentially, that can be paid directly. We wish to contact the state, the governor's office that runs this program. We can request a budget modification now that we actually have these applications in our hand. And we can advise them that we would like to focus on paying those county fees. One of the most important ones would be the county taxes that are owed. There are people that submitted an application that actually owe back tax to the county. It's the remainder of this last year's tax bill. And then there are others that are going to struggle to pay next year's tax bill. We received word through the state that taxes are an eligible expense. So we could route this funding to cover their cannabis tax bills. It can also be used to cover local permitting fees. So those are fees that are due to CDD. Also can be used to pay fees due to ag. So anyone that has remaining licensing or permitting fees, we could use it to pay that. Otherwise, the focus would be on county taxes. This serves a few different points here. A lot of other jurisdictions have struggled to actually get these funds out to local businesses. There have been problems with different businesses not being banked, or for instance, the entity that holds the permit not holding a bank account, or other issues along those lines where it's created complexities and complications that have prevented a program from being deemed to have their funds dispersed by the state. And the deadline we're running up against is that we recently learned the state may even bump the next application window up to September. That would mean that of our initial award, we would want to have expended at least 50% of those funds based off our last understanding. So although our equity program does allow for other more complicated and complex ventures, given the time frame that we're on, staff believes it would be best to focus on funds that can be quickly dispersed in an effective way to the local businesses. And paying those county fees, whether they be permit fees or taxes, seems like a straightforward way to do it. It meets the audit trail requirements for the state. It is easily dispersible. Since it's within the county apparatus, we can pay the department directly out of the grant funds that we're currently holding. So in staff's opinion, that would be the best way to proceed. The two other points we want to raise are that originally staff thought 25,000 would be the cap of what we could award. Given the number of applications and given that we received that second round of funding, we believe that we could raise that ceiling to $50,000. That would be enough. Our median grows for cannabis are around an acre. So that's enough to pay both the tax bill for a lot of applicants that are in this program, in addition to covering some of their permit or licensing fees if those are applicable. The other point that your board may wish to consider is that someone having not paid their tax bill is grounds for a permit revocation. CDD could ultimately take action to revoke that permit through the Planning Commission. Since they would have an application pending with the county for this cannabis equity funding that would satisfy that bill, I think staff's just looking for direction from your board on how to handle that, whether there should be some sort of grace applied, whether we treat that bill as being pending or not yet determined because we may be able to use those grant funds to cover it. I think staff's just looking for direction about how to proceed in both those, both the cap of 50,000 and how to handle delinquent taxes for those that are applying in this program.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Sabatier?
I'll just go with one, yes to the $50,000. Let's make sure we spend this down. And two, how many applicants do you have that aren't paid up that from last year's taxes that have applications in? Do you know what that number is? And I apologize for not emailing you that question earlier.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that up. We just completed, with help from Kim in our office, actually, we completed a database with everyone that submitted an application, but we haven't tied that back into the data from CDD or tax collector. So I don't have the figures on how that might match up to their interactions with other departments. I do know anecdotally that I talked to several people that had an outstanding tax bill. So that's something we're gonna have to look into. We also need a little bit more time to match up some of these applications. An unfortunate part of this is that the way a lot of these applications are submitted by applicants and business names, it's going to take a little bit of work to match up some of the documentation that's necessary and tie them all back to the correct permit. But we're in the process of doing that.
I'm going to, if you can allow me, Supervisor Simon, I'm going to convey the same message that he gave earlier, which is how do we make this as simple as possible for you? They need to make sure they provide the right application name to connect it to it. That should not be our investigation job. That just seems like that's adding a lot of unnecessary work on our staff, especially when the idea is you're asking for money that eventually is free to them to ask for if they meet a specific criteria. We should be doing the least amount of work possible, not the entire legwork for them. I apologize for conveying your previous comment for this one, but I think it fits just right.
Common sense, absolutely.
Yeah, it's unfortunately we do have multiple applications that are require follow-up. Speaking with other jurisdictions that have gone through this does seem to be typical. And what we are going to have to determine is it seems like the accepted practice through the state is that they do want some sort of outreach that everyone has a chance to correct or amend their application if there is some sort of shortcoming or to provide additional documentation. But especially because we are on a bit of a clock here with the state in terms of making sure we disperse these funds, we are going to have to make a determination at some point of how much time we give someone. If we contact them and they don't provide the additional documentation we need, we may not be able to fund them in this round, and they would still be able to apply in the future, but we are going to have to determine a cutoff.
Yeah, no, I'd like to see that if it doesn't meet something simple, it just gets denied and they can go ahead and try again if they want. But yeah, I don't know, just putting it out there that I think that if you're asking for free money, you should be doing the legwork for us, not vice versa. If it's, I almost want to put a conditional, if it's less than 10% of the applications that have been approved that are, have filed for an equity grant and have not been able to pay their back taxes, I'm okay with moving forward and saying that they can go ahead and continue to use their use permit. But if it's more than 10%, I think we need to have a conversation again. But that's, I don't want to just give a clear blanket yes or no on that one without knowing a little bit more data.
Supervisor Pyska?
With the applications that you received, how much funding is being requested compared to what we've got available?
So that's an interesting point. There are people that wrote up requests that would exceed the 50,000 mark that we're talking about. We left our application actually a little broader than was necessary, partially because the state wanted that data. So we had people put in other projects they were interested in doing. So we have an idea of what kind of funding was out there, or what kind of funding requests would be out there, because we can include that information in our September application, and that may drive the state to give us more funding. We did let people know in the actual application itself that it was likely only 25,000 would be permissible. So while they could put in for more, which we encouraged to list what their actual need was, it was clear that 25,000 would likely be the cap.
Okay, so if we bump it to 50,000, are we going to be able to fund the 50% by September?
Yes, if we could do 50,000, then assuming some of these applications ultimately don't meet the criteria, we have 49 applications. If we could get 25 or more of them, basically if half or more of them were to qualify, we could hit our threshold easily.
Okay, and I think the fees and the taxes are the easiest way to go, but are there other needs that have been identified?
Yes, there's a host of other needs that have been identified. There are people that need help with, at least anecdotally from, haven't been through all of it, from what I've seen, there are people that need help with various improvements on their property, different business costs. There are people that are essentially saying they need help with capital just to get through the downturn. One of our problems is that it's very limited what the state equity programs will actually let us pay for, even if we were to have the ability to pay it. So that's going to take more work to see whether those actually fall in to our equity criteria. But the problem for us was that given the funds need to be expended on such a short time frame, we didn't really dive that deeply into it. We could if your board wanted us to.
But maybe those people, those applicants that need that assistance in other ways likely also need assistance with fees and taxes. And so maybe during that reach out, their need could just be kind of recalibrated.
We also have, there may have been some misunderstandings within the applications. We had multiple people say no to the request for funding of their local tax bill or permitting fees. And we don't really understand why they would say no. We think it's because they would prefer that these other projects be funded. So we do plan on contacting them to let them know that the funding of the local fees and taxes would be the way that they could receive funding in this round, to give them an opportunity to amend.
Great, thank you, Patrick.
All right, anything else from the board? Supervisor Simon?
Yeah, so I just want to, just as Supervisor Sabatier did too, number one, absolutely, I think moving to 50,000 and also giving you the board, giving you permission, at least I'm in favor of requesting the budget modification with GoBiz. The second part gets a little more complicated, but I completely agree with the general statement of, if they're one of the 48 applicants, that we do hold off until we figure out how to get the funds either to them or they deny the request or the opportunity. Like you said, some folks weren't in favor of doing the fees or the taxes, but at least after today, hopefully they'll get the message, hey, this is probably the way we're going to go for right now. So either you're in or you're out, and that would be their decision.
All right, I'm not seeing any other comment. Supervisor Sabatier?
Yeah, just a quick question. We just did budget last week with an anticipation of about 3.5 or 3.6 million in taxes. If all of this is utilized for tax purposes, was that accounted for in our budget, or is this 1.9 million a part of the 3.6? I'm just kind of curious what the thinking was in creating the 3.6 and where this fits in.
So that would be more of a question for Stephen Carter, but based off of our discussions, I believe within that 3.6, this is accounted for within that. Some of that, there would be cultivators using these funds to pay, that some of those taxes in that 3.6 would have been paid with these equity funds. I do not believe that we would anticipate these payments artificially increasing that amount. I think it was built into that number.
Okay. I was really hoping that was not the answer.
Sorry.
All right, so I'll open this up for the public. If there's any comments or anybody wants to comment on this item on the agenda, 7.3, please come on up.
Hello, Michael Wegner here again today. Thank you guys so much for bringing all these things forward. I think it's a huge handout to help people get back to where they need to be. And you guys have really moved forward in a fast and efficient manner to get everything on the table. So I just want to tell you thank you for everybody in the cannabis community.
All right. Anyone else from the public? I'm looking on Zoom as well. All right. I will bring it back to the board for direction. Supervisor Sabatier.
I do want to ask the board what their thoughts are, and in my mind, I'm conflicted on it, but at the same time, there are some people who are waiting on this, as stated by Mr. Sullivan, to pay their back taxes, who have a application that is turned in. Does the board feel that if an application has been turned in with the anticipation to pay off their back taxes, if approved, that they can keep going with their projects for this year, or that they should be placed on hold until all of this is finalized and paid off?
I think they could be able, if they have the application in, they've met the deadline and we're able to do it, I would say continue moving forward with this year.
Yep.
I guess it would depend if the money allowance will cover the taxes that are due. Perhaps if they have more taxes that are due than what we're going to be giving them. Take that into account.
I may be able to speak to
Go
the
ahead.
point raised by Supervisor Scott. Because we're targeting smaller operations in this, almost all the applications are for cultivation size of 1 acre or less, which means the $50,000 cap would cover any delinquent tax bill.
All right.
Yeah.
Supervisor Simon.
And I think that continues. It's been such a challenge as we're trying to establish this new industry for the smaller local grower. And I think this is, a positive step forward for that. I know a lot of growing pains, but I think it's real positive. So thank you for clarifying that too. That's excellent.
No pun intended.
Yeah. I guess.
Perfect, thank you very much.
All right. So with that, we have the direction that you need to move forward?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Board.
All right.
I'm looking at Ms. Grant. Since we're asking the state to make changes to our budget that we already approved, should we do a motion to make that change to 50,000?
That's a good idea.
Okay.
All right.
Then, Mr. Chair, I move to increase the maximum initial award from the grant local equity plan, Cannabis Local Equity Plan, from $25,000 to $50,000.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And with that, I think we have the direction you need, right, Mr. Sullivan? To move forward.
Yes, I do.
here.
Thank you.
For the presentation, and we will now move on to our next item on the agenda.